Well, just another fair day here in this part of Texas. We've just got a little bit of overcast there. More like kind of a broken cirrus layer. But not very much going on. And the satellite is showing that. And there it is. We're located in this area here. Hang on a second, I restarted. Had some computer problems earlier, so I'm trying to get everything back to normal. I did the Windows upgrade about 11 o'clock this morning, and when everything was all said and done, my HDMI audio, which is like my speakers, was not present at all, so I had to roll everything back, and it was just like one thing after another. Alright, so here's my pen tool all up and running, and it looks like that baroclinic system that we had in the Rockies yesterday, that has moved eastward, and now we're finding that up in the northern Great Plains. And usually what we do is we kind of look for that baroclinic leaf structure, and don't see a whole lot of that, but maybe a little bit of trace of that, something like that. What we're looking at for is very strong contrast on the back side of the clouds, kind of like what you see here, and then kind of a feathered appearance downstream. So maybe in Kansas, maybe we're seeing a little bit of that in that region. The clouds down in the Rio Grande, they're looking much more convective, very cold tops on those. And let's see, elsewhere, getting a little bit of Maria there. For some reason that got clipped, but let's see if we can animate that and see a little bit of that storm. Can't tell if that's the eye there or not, but that could just be some wraparound, maybe the dry slot coming around the backside. In any case, that is going to be grazing the Cape Hatteras area in about a day or two, but we're not expecting any big effects with that. Down in Florida, looks like we're getting a little bit of a storm anvil here from Fort Myers up to Lake Okeechobee. I don't see any cold tops on this, so I think this is just a lot of broken overcast cloud in that region. Maybe still kind of dry for the most part there. And then in Texas we see the colder tops southwest of San Antonio there. And San Antonio is located about right in that region right there. So that little area of convective development looks like that is probably going to remain just south of there for the time being. And then out west we see a little bit of that heat there, where everything is very purple. And just how much heat, you can use this pen tool, and we can see that about 2 hours ago, 306 Kelvin, 307 Kelvin. That's going to be about 35 Celsius there, which is about 95 Fahrenheit, but that is mostly the surface temperature there. That's not necessarily the air temperature. Then we see that's kind of faded off, and then at this hour, surface temperature is around 293, which is more on the order of about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So some pretty rapid cooling in that area, and in fact we can make out the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon there. Grand Canyon located right in this area here. Looks to be like a pretty steep lapse rate there, since it's showing up very well there. Very blue color there down at the bottom, where we have 288. That's going to be in the 60-degree Fahrenheit range, and then up on the rim, 280, which is going to be right around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 to 50. And we've actually got a very cold air mass in place here. Let's go through some of the charts, and let me bring that up. Okay, one way I wanted to go through some of the charts was using College DuPage. We'll give this just a second and come up here under the weather analysis tools. We go to numerical models, and we've got this nested NAM right here. And that's a pretty interesting tool there, as we can look at weather at a very tight scale there using a very fine NAM grid there. So let me go ahead and set this up, and I'm going to bring up the temperature grid, because temperature is kind of what controls everything weather-wise. I had intended to set up a bunch of windows here, but I got kind of behind schedule. So let me bring this up real quick and get this started. And we'll take a mesoscale look at the weather here. All right, so let me take a look at the chat and see what we got going on here. Making sure the audio's okay here. Carl Burkhoff is here in Electric Dog. Exciting mesoscale program. Yep, hoping to get that set up here, and we're going to do it with this nested NAM here. This will give us one way of looking at the weather, not synoptically, but looking at the small scale and looking at terrain interactions, and it's a different way of looking at the patterns here. Carl Berghoff looking for his order to arrive. Yeah, that should be there in the next couple of days. I was glad to finally get that out. We have David Moore here and Ryan Toomeys. He's got Military Airlift Command in town, picking up troops and supplies, heading over to Puerto Rico. And we can see a little bit of that with this, let's see here. Waiting for one of my hard drives to wake up. There it is. Photo from Ryan Toomeys. I appreciate that. I'm guessing that's Fort Lauderdale, maybe. Maybe he can fill us in, but you can see a C-17 there, parked on the ramp. This is pretty large cargo aircraft, a little bit smaller than a C-5, a little bit bigger than a C-141 there. Can carry quite a bit of payload. So those are, it's heading out to Puerto Rico. So it's definitely some good news, because things are in dire straits there for sure. We have Michael Burrell here and Ron Chalfant. Big presence this morning at the local airport there at Ryan, where Ryan is. Been busy in South Florida there. And he says the other islands to the east are much worse. We haven't heard too much about them, but the North Caribbean islands just obliterated, with new pictures and video coming out from that area. Lives and property will not ever be the same again. Cruise ship industry already changing float plan itineraries away from those islands for this season coming up. David Moore has been too busy to check the weather lately, heading to West Texas tomorrow. We have Fun with Tech here, and Alexi and Kathy Campbell. Tree Nelson, Sarah Wood, commercial airlines flights starting tomorrow morning, heading to Puerto Rico, supply chain moving forward. Alex Front seeing some buffering. Let's see, my little green indicator here showing up good stream health. I was dropping some frames earlier. I don't know what the cause of that was, but we'll see what's going to happen. All right, I think we're good to go here. So let me move things along here. Okay, so here's our look at the weather for tonight. This is the 18Z NEM here. And what we're looking at right here is weather for today. And I'm going to bring this up to the 0Z time point, and you can see Las Vegas showing 71 degrees there. Very cool temperatures for this time of the year. In northern Nevada, we've got 50s in that area, 53 around Elko. Actually, that's Ely right there. 54 up in the northern part of Nevada. So very cold air mass in that Great Basin area. 50s also for Salt Lake City and Cedar City there. And you can see the northerly flow coming out of that region there. So that's kind of a key to what's going on. We've got a polar air mass in place, very dense air, and we can see that northerly flow there also in Vegas. And that's heading all the way down into the Mojave Desert. Also northwesterly flow in the San Joaquin Valley. But temperatures there are on the warm side, 86 in Bakersfield, 87 in Sacramento. So I guess they didn't get quite as much of the cold air in that region as they did in Nevada and Utah. And then we have 86 around Phoenix there, much cooler than it's been. And even through that area, you can see the north winds. So this area pretty much under the influence of that large upper level high. Okay, let me change sectors and take a look at the northwest U.S. And I'm trying to figure out a way to avoid getting the stream hammered too much. I'm going to load up the 0Z model here. That should only load the first 21 hours. So let's take a look here. Okay, so this is the Pacific Northwest. And what we see here is very cool temperatures once again. These are going to be afternoon highs, and we see 75 there around I think that's Yakima, just west of Spokane, but lots of 60s and only a few 70s in that area. And you can see the winds are out of the north through a lot of this area. And then when you get up into central Washington and British Columbia, they're light and variable there. Winds in Montana out of the west there. So this is some outflow there from that very strong polar air mass that's in place, probably centered on Idaho right there. We'll shift down to the Great Plains. Yeah, there may be a little bit of buffering of the stream. I had intended to have all these loops all set up in their own little tabs, but I got a little bit behind there, so it's probably buffering a little bit here. And I think we're good to go. Okay, so here's the picture in Texas. This is going to be pretty much current, and what we see here is southeasterly flow across Texas. Okay, so we've got a little bit of recycled polar air coming from the southeast U.S. Same thing in Arkansas there, but we see a much different picture up in Kansas, and there we have north winds. 40s in the Goodland area, 50s around Russell and Dodge City, and 60 around Wichita. So this is a very strong cold air mass working its way southward through the high plains. And the leading edge of that air mass looks like it runs from about Kansas City to about Blackwell down to Altus. And then we pick it up. See this trough right here? This is a pressure trough right there. And I think we're finding that front kind of running right through that trough. And then that leading edge kind of curls back into the higher terrain of Colorado like that. So El Paso, they've got a little bit of west wind there. So I think what we're seeing here is a little bit of the Pacific influence from that cool air mass coming from the west there. Maybe they're on the nose of some of that Pacific air. But we're kind of guessing, and what we really need to do is take a look at a top-down approach, and let's do that. Sometimes we have to zoom way out in order to understand the small-scale details. So let's do that. Let's look at the thickness charts. Okay, so this is the current plot here. The main baroclinic area runs from Ontario down through Minnesota, and then across the Four Corners area there. So that's going to place the front something like that. Warm front up through Lake Superior and northern Ontario. Okay, so far this is falling in place pretty closely with what we have there with the mesoscale charts. Where things are getting hazy is out in the southwest U.S. And I don't see too much of a thickness gradient from west to east across Los Angeles, Phoenix, and El Paso. So I think what we have is more of a maybe something like that right there. Maybe a little bit of a, or even maybe our front is cleared most of Arizona. Maybe it's down in the Fort Huachuca area and almost to El Paso there. It's not really clear. What we can do is we can take a look at the 1000 through 850. Maybe that'll help a little bit. Nope, not much help, only two lines. Obviously, the Great Plains front really stands out. We can see that there for sure, and especially very, very tight gradient up in Ontario. So that's what we see on that chart. So we're still kind of guessing what's happening in the southwest U.S., and I think we have to kind of fall back on trends and previous charts if we have those available. Okay, so that's what's happening there. Let's go back to the mesoscale charts. Okay, so it's a little bit indeterminate what's happening out in western New Mexico, but it does look like we've got this Canadian front coming south. So we're going to put that frontal boundary like that right there. And what we see during the overnight hours, we're going to see this pushing rapidly southward. And take a look especially out in this area here. I'm going to run this forward for about 12 hours. Looks like we've got this surge, very strong surge developing, and heading for the West Texas area. You can see that 15-knot wind right there around Artesia and Roswell. And then we see the winds picking up out of the northeast and the El Paso area. And you can see a very strong upslope component through Albuquerque. So these are winds coming through the passes. West of Albuquerque, it's probably going to be pretty windy there tomorrow with that funneling through the canyons in that area. So this is kind of a backdoor front. And we typically see this in New Mexico with very strong fronts coming through that area. Then we see the rest of the front coming into Texas, and there it is. Coming into Ardmore and Tulsa, all the way down to Abilene. So this is going to be tomorrow at 22Z. In fact, we can just bring this up to the time of the webcast. And there's the leading edge of that front right there. Okay, I'm going to load up another frame here, so it may buffer a little bit, but we're going to head to the Midwest. So here we go. So we'll give this just a minute here, and I'll grab some water. So once again, this is College DuPage weather, and that's going to be weather.cod.edu. That's going to be under their NEM Nest tab right there. Okay, I think this is going to be mostly loaded. So what we have looks like kind of a frontal gradient here. Okay, at least it looks that way. You can see definitely some warmer air in the Corn Belt of Illinois into northern Missouri. So let's run that forward overnight. You can see that we lose the thermal contrast along that boundary. So where's the front? Seems like we kind of lost it here, right? Well, it appears what we had there might have been an outflow boundary, because we should be seeing some height rises in this area, and we don't have that. Probably what we've got is the actual front being way out to the west here. This is probably the true front starting to catch up to this area. And indeed, when we run the charts, let's take a look here. When we get the heating coming back in during the day tomorrow, yeah, there's the strong temperature contrast right there. So we go from 78 in the Quad Cities there, 86 in Quincy, 85 just northwest of Columbia, or I don't know what town that would be. It's going to be northwest of St. Louis there. And then we go from that to 68 in Des Moines and 68 in Kansas City. So very strong temperature contrast there. So it appears that this is probably the main front. And I'm going to put that actually along the leading edge where we have the wind shift and the first initial drop of the temperatures. So the proper location is going to be like that. This is going to be 19Z. This is 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And then we're going to find the warm front well to the north, kind of off the top of the map there. So for the rest of the afternoon, see that right there? A little bit of modeling. That's probably showers and thunderstorms starting to develop there in Illinois along and ahead of the front. So that's going to be from about west of Chicago out to north of St. Louis. And this is 5 p.m., so if you're heading into Chicago, especially from the west coast there, you may see a flight delays there since the holding patterns and the standard terminal arrivals, they kind of cut through this area right there. So there's probably going to be some changes there on the air routes coming into Chicago. So that'll continue moving eastward, and then the front gets hard to find once again. But you can definitely see the height or the pressure rises way back here. Very definite pressure rises and the northwest winds in the wake of that cold front. All right, let's take one more look out in another area, and I'm going to head to the northeast U.S. And I'm going to kind of split the difference and go to the mid-Atlantic. So let me bring that up. And I can see that we're dropping frames, so I'm going to wait for things to kind of settle out here. In fact, this is what I'm looking at here. See here, so I can kind of see the trouble happening here as the products load. If we ever get faster internet in here, then this is not going to be such a big problem, but it looks like it stopped there. We're now sitting at 8740. Ooh, that's kind of a cool effect there. Whoa! All right. Okay, starting out with the current conditions, we've got some very warm temperatures in the northeast U.S., and it's not quite as apparent right now because temperatures are in the mid-70s, and they've fallen off from the afternoon highs. The northeast U.S. has been dark for a couple of hours, but they were well up in the 80s earlier today. And some parts of Ontario were up near 90. So what's going to happen overnight? Well, not much going on. We just got ridging across this area, just a lot of upper-level subsidence working on this region. And then for tomorrow, more hot weather. And let's find the hottest part of the day. It's going to be about right here, right around right around 20Z, it looks like. You can see around 90 around Detroit, upper 80s in Ontario, and a lot of parts of the northeast U.S. where not too many people have air conditioning. That's up in the mid to upper 80s in some areas of upstate New York there. So very hot air mass in place in this region. And down to the south we can see Maria grazing the coast of North Carolina. Let me bring that up. Yeah, there it is. Very spectacular. And we can see it kind of slowing down there off Cape Hatteras, but that's expected to quickly gain steam and start moving to the east there. Okay, so I'm going to show you one additional way we can look at this information, and that's with the soundings. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with soundings, but what I've done is I've prepared some soundings going from east to west and north to south. And I don't think we've ever done this before. Okay, so up here at the top, you can see we're at 43 north, 70 west. So that's going to be off the Atlantic coast. So we're out over the Atlantic Ocean. So what do we see here? Kind of a tropical air mass. If we extend this line down to the surface, we've got temperatures around maybe 73, 74 Fahrenheit, which is, pretty warm for the Atlantic Ocean there. And then we've got this maritime layer down below where the air is a little bit cooler there. So I'm going to move westward in intervals of about 30 miles. And here we go. So we're going to move westward. There's 73 west, 74 west, and you can see that not a whole lot of change. Picking up a little bit of upper level moisture up in this area here, got higher humidity. Upper level winds are kind of modest right there. And we're starting to cross onto the coast there. We're getting close. There's 81. And I think we're getting into the New York area. And you can see that the lower part of the temperature trace has kind of steepened. It's almost dry adiabatic there. So very strong heating taking place. This is valid for about right now. So 85, that's going to be over Michigan. And you can see a little bit of upper level moisture there, a little bit of cirrus. And now we're getting to 88 west. We're starting to get into Wisconsin. And it looks like we've picked up a little bit of low level moisture. Not very rich, but it is very deep there. Let me back that up and see where we picked that up. Yeah, we picked that up coming onto the coast there. And then after 87 to 88, we're getting into Wisconsin. There's 90. We see very steep lapse rates there, so very strong heating. And now we're starting to see things cooling off a little bit. Temperatures around 73. And now we see a little bit of an inversion here. So this is over northern Minnesota. Things have cooled down in the low levels a little bit, but the winds are out of the south. And this is kind of what we expect to find around the area of a warm front. And temperatures cool as we continue going west. And look at this, we're already down to 57. We're at 95 west, so that's going to be around South Dakota. So we got a little bit of a frontal inversion. The air mass is about 5,000 feet deep. So we've crossed over where we have a front, and you can see the backed winds. It's a little bit hard to read, but there's the southeast winds right there. In fact, I think we have some northeast winds. And then we continue going west. And the air mass deepens. We're at about 97 west. And now we're getting close to the Rockies. And you can see the whole column shifting over to the west. So the whole air mass column is cooling, and we've got the upper level winds strengthening there up to about 105 knots. And then we see the lower part of the trace steepening, so we've got some instability there. So it's kind of like some cold instability there, and we've got a low tropopause. So it looks like we're kind of back in some of that polar air there, but the upper level winds are still out of the south. So we're now at 104 west. We're around Wyoming. So it looks like the tropopause is all the way down to about 27,000 feet. We've got very steep lapse rates in the lower atmosphere, so it's a very unstable profile there. And I think we've pretty much hit the heart of the cold polar air. Winds aloft have died down. Now we're at about 108 west. We're getting into Idaho. And the winds are coming around to the north aloft. And what we see is just some continued low-level instability there. A little bit of warm temperatures in the mid-levels. So probably a little bit of subsidence working on that area, which is normally what we find west of the trough. And there's 115 west, so we're getting into Oregon. Some very dry, low-level air. So now subsidence working through a much deeper layer. Now we're at 117, getting towards the western Wisconsin area. So it still looks like it's a little bit unstable in the lower levels, but a lot of warmth in the mid-levels. Stronger northerly flow aloft. And then we cross over into the Pacific coast. We get kind of a marine environment. Starts to warm up a little bit, but very humid conditions. And now I think we're off into the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so that's kind of a transversal of the U.S. from west to east. And we can do that very quickly from north to south. And let me do that. This is along the 97-degree meridian. So we're starting out in the Gulf, and we've got very moist conditions there. This is going to be off the Mexican coast. So we see 85 over 76 there. There's that very strong low-level moisture. And we've got kind of a moist adiabatic temperature profile. You can see the winds aloft, very light, which is what we typically see in the subtropics. So heading north, we're in the Gulf of Mexico. This is all Gulf of Mexico air. And now we're crossing the coast around Houston. Winds aloft starting to pick up a little bit out of the west there. Starting to get a little bit more instability there in the column. And now we're crossing into East Texas, and you can see the lower atmosphere turns more unstable. Steeper lapse rates there, so stronger heating on the landmass there. So you see that right there, very steep lapse rates. And then you can see some of that cirrus aloft there. So let me see where we're at. This is close to where we're at. That's the cirrus layer, and that's what we had there on that opening there. Okay. So heading forward, let's keep going north. We're up into Oklahoma. Still pretty unstable. Then we get into Kansas. And now we're looking at a little bit cooler air mass, and still a little bit of instability there. Lots of humidity, and we've got a little bit of westerly flow at the surface, so we've probably crossed over into a convective system there. Now we're picking up the front. You can see the frontal inversion down here. We're moving up through Nebraska and South Dakota. And as we continue moving north, you see the cold air mass deepen. That's the cold air mass. And everything is shifting to the left. So we're getting cooling of the column. And we're also seeing the tropopause start to come down. And also the winds aloft are picking up there. So that's all signs that we're getting back into the polar air. And then finally we get north into Manitoba, some drying aloft, starting to get north of the jet. And the surface temperatures come down to 44. And then finally we get into northern Manitoba, 43 degrees there. And the tropopause all the way down to 30,000 feet there with westerly flow aloft. Okay, so that's another way of looking at the surface analysis. And let me see if I can bring up something interesting here. I'm going to bring up the skew-T for the area around the North Pole. So this is going to be a sounding that's going to be very far to the north. Waiting for the data to come in here. And there it is. What is this? Hang on. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, we had a little bit of a problem there, but there's the skew-T there for alert, which is about as close as you can get to the North Pole and still be on a landmass. And you can see that the surface temperature there is 13 Fahrenheit. And you can see the very strong inversion there, a little bit of warm air in the mid-levels. And then you can see how low that tropopause is, all the way down to about 30,000 feet. And these skew-Ts really get interesting in the wintertime. We'll have like minus 40 to minus 50. And then you'll see the temperature line go way over like this. And then up like that, then we have a low tropopause, and then it'll do stuff like that. So very weird patterns, and I'll try to show you more and more of that as we get into winter here. Okay, so let's move things along. That's our look at mesoscale weather. Okay, so here's the weather on August 8th. Let's bring this current. So we'll bring up a look at current conditions, and I'm going to try to bring up the nighttime imagery for Puerto Rico. See how things are looking in terms of the electrical grid. So they've got a couple of very useful products here. If we scroll down, we will find the Earth at night. Bring up the nighttime imagery there. Let me shut these off here. Oh yeah, it looks like we've got the... This is a much better image than we had yesterday. It's still pretty grainy because of all the high cloud. Yesterday we were having problems with overcast. So we were getting kind of a lot of problems. 23rd, same problem. but it looks like last night we're getting one of the first clear images. So apparently some places are getting electricity. San Juan definitely, the ring around the town, the island seems to be looking okay. So I don't know. I've heard that the electrical grid is 80% down, and the only thing I can really be sure of is a lot of the small towns in the interior, a lot of those are obviously without power. And then the status of these little towns and cities through here, I really don't know. There's just not much coherent information coming out of there. But San Juan is actually looking pretty decent right now. So at least that's a good sign there. And then the Caribbean islands, most of those are looking okay at this time. So anyway, that's as far as what I know there. Current conditions, there's Maria out there off the Cape Hatteras coast. And we've already gone all over all this weather. We've got a pretty good idea where the fronts are. We know that once you get into the Dakotas and Minnesota, we've got a frontal air mass in that region, a cold air mass. So we're looking at something like that right there. So NHC, what do we got for Maria? We've got a Category 1 storm, gradually losing steam as it moves north. It's filled to 965 millibars. And there's the track. So recurvature is already underway. And that's going to take it pretty far out to sea very quickly and be out of the picture by Friday and Saturday. But let's look at the 5-day and see what we have. We're always concerned about Cape Verde storms moving out into the Caribbean and the Windward Islands there. 5-day graphics showing things appear to be pretty quiet. So I guess we've got a little bit of a respite here. But we do know that the GFS has been trying to develop something in this area and bring it up into the Gulf around the second week of October. So that's just something we're going to have to watch over the next week to a week and a half. And then by then, things should start becoming a little bit more clear. So there's the upper level picture. We know that the trough is right over the coldest air. So that's situated over Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah. And out ahead of that, we've got the polar front jet from New Mexico all the way up to the Dakotas. And there's the theta analysis. So we can kind of use this to pick up on the front. And yeah, so it looks like it does recurve into Colorado. We've got a little bit of a theta ridge through Durango and Alamosa. So probably a little bit of warm air there in New Mexico. And then I think what we're seeing is something like that right there. I think that's probably what I would have to go with for the analysis in the southwest U.S. where things were kind of vague. So there's the northerly flow wrapping around the west side and the theta gradient to support that. So this air here, this is all Canadian origin, much colder, and this air here is of Pacific origin and a little bit more modified. So we've got a very thorough picture of what's happening. I think we can go right to the models now, so let's do that. So before I go to the models, let me take a look at the chat, and usually what I do is I give you all something to look at. So let's do that. Let's look at the satellite loop there. Okay, let's see here. Carl says, remember to like. Yes, please like the channel. That does help our YouTube search rankings quite a bit. Thomas Copeland, late to the party, not a problem. Alex says the buffering is not that bad. We did drop a lot of frames when we were loading those College DuPage images. You can see here we dropped 12,000 frames during the weathercast. If you divide that by 30, that's the number of seconds. So I think we've probably lost about maybe 1 or 2 minutes of footage, but I think it all worked out here. We were able to see quite a bit here. Ryan says in Puerto Rico it's approaching Mad Max levels outside the San Juan area as supplies dwindle. Roads washed out and completely impassable. New pictures and videos posted today of the devastation further along the shoreline and inland. Alex says, do moist standards always have the same slope? Or moist adiabats? Well, moist adiabats are curved, and they follow a slope of about 6 Celsius degrees per kilometer. It does vary depending on the temperature and height, but it is a constant. Carl Berghoff says you beat me on the keyboard. And Dwayne Ward joining us here. Okay, so let's go ahead and head into the model data, and we will wrap things up. So what we'll do is we will look at the European model. European model has had a lot of good successes over the past month. Handled the track of Maria very well. Let me get this situated here. Okay, there we go. So there's Maria off the coast this morning with 961 millibars. Okay, so we're going to see that move along the Cape Hatteras coast and then recurve out to sea very quickly. So that'll be out of the picture soon. And then that leaves the question of the Midwest. So we know the fronts are kind of in this area like that. For tomorrow morning, they're going to be nosing into West Texas, driven by this large area of high pressure. And then it looks like that high pressure will consolidate in the Rockies for Wednesday morning and cover much of this region. Temperatures will be below normal in this area. Some cold mornings for Denver and Cheyenne and Salt Lake City. And then we'll see that front coming into Texas, kind of oozing southward during the day. By Thursday, it should be through most of Texas, and starting to push into the eastern U.S. there. So you can kind of see how this high pressure area is dominating most of the U.S. here. And this is also influencing the path of Maria, because with all this cold air, we've got the jet kind of pushed southward, which means the prevailing westerlies are going to be kind of strong in this area, and that's going to pick up the storm and move it quickly to the east. So by Friday morning, high pressure pretty much everywhere, some cool mornings in the southern U.S. A little bit of low pressure there on Lake Huron. Then Saturday morning, high shifting to the east. Very cool for the central and eastern U.S. And then we've got cyclogenesis taking hold again in Alberta and Saskatchewan. This looks like lee-side troughing. So what I'm thinking of for fronts is maybe something like that right there. And then this right here, this would just be lee-side troughing. Then for Monday, continued cyclogenesis, and wow, look at that very strong anticyclogenesis over British Columbia. That's kind of unusual there. It looks like a lot of polar air developing there in British Columbia. So something like that. Meanwhile, some of the lee-side troughing pushing out into the plains. And then we've got our next cold air outbreak coming down on Tuesday. And I could swear this looked a little bit different from what we had yesterday. I think the European model was trying to develop something there in Washington and Oregon, and I don't see that on this run here. But what I do see is kind of a backdoor front in Texas and the southeast U.S., so more northerly gradient or easterly gradient there in Texas. And you can see that the Gulf is completely shut down. So we're not going to see too much moisture in the U.S. So I'm tired of summer, so this is definitely a good omen here. All right, and then we'll wrap this up with the GFS and run quickly through that. There goes Maria off the coast. Our high pressure area sinks southward. A little bit of upslope storms there in New Mexico and West Texas. That'll be the case through about Thursday or Friday, and then things will shift southward and start shutting down. There's the high pressure there in the Great Lakes area. Lots of cold air advection in this region here. And then for Sunday and Monday, just more of the same. Start to get some cyclogenesis, though, in Saskatchewan there. So that'll be our next system coming together in this region. And that occludes pretty quickly. And then our next system comes into Idaho and into Nevada and Central California. So something like this for Wednesday. Snow in the higher elevations there. And that'll move mostly to the north-northeast there. So we'll see a pattern kind of like this. For Thursday, the 5th. And then another system coming through. Very baroclinic there in the Great Basin and Rockies there. Lots of systems coming through that area. Gulf not quite open, though. So that's going to have an effect on the latent heat in these systems. We can't charge those with moisture, so they're going to come through kind of on the dry side as they go through the northern plains there. And then it looks like we got a little bit of a tropical disturbance coming up around the 11th or 12th. We've been kind of watching for that. And then we get to the end of the frame, so that's about all I've got there. But more high pressure, so I think we've got temperatures below normal for the first and second week of October there. Okay, so that probably about does it for me. I appreciate you all watching the webcast. Let me kill my speakers here. And hopefully you all have a good rest of the evening. And take care, and we will see you tomorrow.